Hey, everybody, it's your friend Adam. I'm here with Adam Cook. I don't want to say it the wrong way now.
I set you up with the pre-show.
I did. I know. He told me
Yes.
the way not to say it, and that's the way that's stuck in my head right now. So it's Adam. Drew, why don't you introduce Adam for us? Drew Welty is moderating for us today, and he's going to introduce Adam.
Yeah. So Adam Kokesh is an American libertarian political activist, radio host, author, and U.S. 2020 Libertarian candidate, running on a single-issue platform of an orderly dissolution of the federal government. Kokesh is a former U.S. Marine sergeant serving the Iraq War in 2004. Upon his return from Iraq, he became an anti-war activist and an advocate for the Iraq Veterans Against the War group. He emerged as a radio talk show host in 2011 when his TV, radio, and web access show Adam versus the Man was licensed by RT America.
So we really are glad you took the time to talk to us today. This is going to be awesome. So
I'm excited for this conversation. I just got to say about that introduction. I think that's the nicest thing Wikipedia has ever said about me.
Well, we're good. With the title of this debate, I swung for the fences. So the thing that we're going to be discussing today is, without a strong central government, would America collapse? And I am taking the affirmative position. Adam is going to take the negative position. This is going to be more of a discussion, conversational. We don't want to get super antagonistic. We want to understand each other's ideas. And Adam definitely has some very interesting ideas. I've seen a number of his debates. He's debated Sargon of Akkad. Who else have you debated, Adam?
Oh, well, most recently, it's funny, I'm being attacked as if I was affiliating with him for having debated the crying Nazi Christopher Cantwell and Richard Spencer and Augustus Invictus. And it's funny, I get attacked for having alt-right affiliations for debating people in the alt-right. I've debated with the other libertarian candidates running for the presidential nomination this year. We have some great candidates with Arvin Vohra, Dan Berman, Kim Roth, Max Abramson. And there's several others that I'm leaving out, I'm sure, but I take all comers. You know, I love debate, and I love it in the online format that's so easy for people to connect like this and really have, you know, rich conversations. And I love the way you said that, setting this up, Adam, because you have the same name as me, and that sounds awesome. But no, because I've kind of, I feel like the way that I've come to be better at debating, you know, is rather than coming, you know, armed with jokes and barbs and talking points, and I'm gonna win, but you know, to come in with an attitude of, you know, this is a collaborative intellectual exercise. You know, maybe you're coming from one position, I'm coming from another, but if I'm open-minded to say, like, you know, I could be corrected, I could be wrong about something, I'm open to hearing that. You know, taking that approach into debates has sort of taken things to the next level for me, and I think I win more, you know, going in with that attitude than you know, it's almost like judo rather than boxing, and I think that makes for a better conversation. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it disturbs me that people are giving you a hard time for who you're actually debating, because we would love to debate these people, but a lot of times the social justice advocates won't step up and debate. So they'll complain about who you're talking to, and at the same time they won't talk to you. It's a catch-22.
Yeah, and if I may, it's a little sidebar on that. I was recently invited to speak at the Straight Pride Parade in Boston that's coming up this weekend. And it's kind of like the free speech rally that they did in Boston, where there were like 30 people at the rally and then 40,000 protesters. It's kind of a continuation of that. And it is these, you know, how you define the alt-right and who claims it and who isn't. I don't really care. It's a big nebulous term. But the people behind this are obviously telling a bad joke. They're trolling. They've created a big platform, and they've invited me to speak. And what I put on my Twitter recently, I think really sums it up, is that I'm willing to fight fascism in every form, in any way possible. I'll even talk to people who disagree with me if it comes to that. And there
That's
really
great.
is a perverse kind of bullying that has taken hold in American politics, and I think it's fringe minorities mostly, but like that person is so evil you can't talk to them, and putting like just not shutting people down. And Cynthia McKinney, who literally right before getting on this call, as I was driving to this wonderful shady spot to park my car, I was putting the YouTube video that we uploaded this morning to public and posting it to Facebook and to Twitter and Instagram to draft Cynthia McKinney to run for the Libertarian Party nomination for president in 2020. She's a hero of mine. And in the video, for anybody who wants to go find it, she says that there was actually an academic study that says one of the reasons America is becoming so polarized is because we just don't socialize across ideological lines. Like we don't have communities. We don't have people gathering in ways that get past that. And it's really sad. And I'd like to think that while some of this is a product of technological progress, that also a lot of it is a temporary step backwards that we can overcome. And, hopefully conversations like this can be one small step in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm optimistic about it. The pluses of the technology are too great. We're stumbling a little bit here in the beginning, but I'm sure we'll find our way. I'm very optimistic. So yeah. I'm going to go into my argument. And what interests me about talking to you, I don't remember if it was in your intro, Drew, but you are for the peaceful disillusionment of the government, correct?
Yes. Well, the federal government specifically is the first step in localizing government down to the community level.
Okay, so you want the central government gone. You want all government to be at a local level.
Or I mean, if it ends up being larger than local really isn't the key term here so much as community, because a community is a voluntary group of people who come together by choice because they choose to be a part of a community. Could be geographical, could be based on values, could be lots of other things that make up a community, but that really is the distinguishing feature between something that's community-based versus state-based, is that when it's done by government, at least as we know it today, it's coercive, it's fundamentally unethical, it violates your self-ownership in so many ways. I don't want to take away from your laying out your case here, but yes, the platform that I'm running for the Libertarian Party nomination for president in 2020 on is the peaceful, orderly, responsible dissolution of the federal government in a way that leaves us with 50 independent states and up to 562 sovereign native nations. We disown the false debt and we pay back the American people, the real victims and debtors of this corporation that should be taken through a bankruptcy process.
Okay, so this is great. That clarifies things tremendously. So the topic of the debate is apt then. Without a strong central government, America would collapse. And that's the argument that I want to make. This argument is laid out in the book Why Nations Fail by Darren Acemoglu and James A. Robinson. It's a very popular book. It's been on the New York Times bestseller list. They lay out a very compelling argument in that book that there are four essential things that you need for a prosperous government or a prosperous nation. And they look at other nations that have failed and why they have failed because they're missing one of these components. One of these components is a strong central government, but I'll lay it out in more detail. But I want to start off, there's a quote by Bertrand Russell that I always contemplate because it is kind of the synthesis of the problem of society. And the quote is, every community is exposed to two opposite dangers: ossification through too much discipline and reverence for tradition on the one hand, and that would obviously be the conservative side. And on the other hand, disillusionment
Right.
and subjection to foreign conquest through a growth of individualism and personal experience that makes cooperation impossible. Now, obviously, that's closer to the anarchy side. And I conceive of the political spectrum where on one side you have anarchy, which is total individualism, and on the other side you have like complete totalitarianism, which is like 100% statism. Like the state is basically wiping your ass. Like they do, they tell you where to go, who to talk to. Like, so it's complete oppression,
Careful what
right?
you wish for.
Yeah. So, but I really think we're arguing from kind of middle positions. I see conservatism as a kind of a midpoint, and libertarianism as kind of a midpoint around the center, where, but you seem to be closer to the anarchy side, not all the way there, obviously, because you're talking about some form of government. You're talking about local forms of government. So that's one metric that I look
Well, hold
at.
on again. You switched local for community.
Okay.
And I know that's kind of a semantic distinction, but since you lay it out and since you use the A word with me there, do you mind if I clarify?
No,
on that
go
point,
ahead. Go ahead.
or
Please
do. You
Please do.
going?
No, please do. By all means.
Okay. Yeah. So in the definition of the word anarchy, I mean, there's two definitions, and one is chaos, and the other one is without a state without rulers, anarchy, like monarchy, or panarchy, or oligarchy, that it's a type of ruling system, and it simply means no rulers. And specifically, if you really define it as that, I don't mind being called an anarchist or someone who believes in self-ownership, and you could call me an ANCAP, but I don't think that's really accurate to describe it either. But for me, what it means first and foremost is that we have a voluntary society, that it's ethical, that it's not based around any institutions of coercion. So from that, you could have a government that's voluntary, and that wouldn't be anarchy. And I don't have a problem with that. You have an institution that's a community-based government in a sense that makes it voluntary. I don't have a problem with that. You want to create a socialist commune, but it's voluntary. Everybody comes together by choice. You're not using violence against anybody. You're not forcing your views on your neighbors or holding anybody captive. I want you to have that right as well. So being a voluntarist first and foremost, that's what I'm thinking is, how do we get to that state of ultimate harmony in society where all human relationships are free of force and fraud and coercion?
So I understand the no rulers thing and the voluntary thing. So your ultimate goal is a voluntary society. I think that's admirable, and
right.
I don't know that it's achievable. And I go back to the Bertrand Russell quote. In a society where everyone is so individualistic to the point where they have trouble cooperating, some other entity is going to come in and take them over. In the Bertrand Russell quote, he says, "Subject to foreign conquest." That's exactly what the problem is. So maybe I'll lay out the.
Do you want me to jump in? Do you want me to?
No. Let me lay out the argument in Why Nations Fail, so you have the full context of the four things, and it's funny because the first one on the list is going to make you laugh, because it's the one that the Marxists, the communists, want to get rid of. So in order to have a thriving nation, the four components that they lay out in the book is you must have property rights, because property rights is what incentivizes people to work hard and innovate, and those are important parts of a dynamic and thriving economy. So sorry, communists, sorry, Marxists.
Absolutely.
Property rights are essential to a nation that thrives. It's not a failing state.
Right.
So the second thing, and this is where
about the word anarchy, most people who self-identify as some kind of anarchist also are of that, which is why the term anarchist is really not an appropriate one to apply to a libertarian or a voluntarist, if only because there are a lot of people who identify as anarchists who say, yeah, get rid of property rights, and I'm not one of those.
I understand. Yes. So the second one is, and this is where I think America got it right with its separation of powers. They even call it the separation of powers, broadly distributed power base, which discourages an economy. And this is where autocracies fail, is they get into they form these extractive economic institutions that create a politics that's a winner take all politics. So they have a very narrow elite that control economics and, feather their own nests at everyone else's expense. You can't get a thriving middle class. You get a small number of people who are hyper wealthy, and the rest live in squalor. So you need a broadly distributed power base, and this is where democracy comes in. Like we all have the vote. Yeah. The third one is the one that you have a problem with. It's the strong central government capable of enforcing the rule of law. Because if you don't have enforcement of the law, you have no law. And this is where places like Sierra Leone get into trouble. Like Sierra Leone has been in a civil war for decades because they don't have a strong enough central government that can enforce the law. So these smaller tribes come in, they form their own types of law, which can be very brutal, and they're the law in town. Without a strong central government, you can't enforce the rule of law. So, and the last one, just to round out the argument, is creative destruction. A lot of times once an elite takes power, they're more interested in maintaining power than innovating. Innovation often displaces people in power. So a lot of times this is where monopolies come into play, where like in the South, famously, the landed elite were the power base, and they structured laws like Jim Crow laws to maintain power even after the Civil War was fought. So there's all kinds of examples like that throughout history where if you don't have creative destruction, you will not grow your economy to the point where everybody engages in a growing, vibrant economy that brings everybody out of poverty and sustains a strong central government. There might be a little bit of a delay, Adam, I feel like.
No,
Adam?
that's fine. I was waiting for you to finish there. Do you want me to jump in and take? I mean, I can go a couple different ways with this.
I figured we would do it.
You gave me so much to sink my teeth into here.
Well, this argument, can you understand the argument? I take it. On my debates, I usually do a Steelman section where can you explain the argument so we know the audience knows we're on the same page.
Right. Well, let me try. So let me do a responsive analysis and see if it satisfies that.
Okay.
Because when you say that in order for a nation to succeed, and if by that you mean for a group of people to have a high standard of living, that it needs these four things of property rights, and in that sense, I'm 100% with. And I think I'm with all of the premises of these points. It's just a matter of what is government in relationship to achieving these things. So when you say property rights, yeah, absolutely. Well, government by definition, at least as we know it today, government is a territorial monopoly on the initiation of force. It either says we have special rights within this territory to use violence against people who are acting peacefully, or we're claiming to own everything within our borders, which in a sense of homesteading, of legitimately claiming land rights, is an illegitimate property rights claim. And they're claiming something that they don't have a right to do when they say, well, we're going to tax you to for your property or to do business in our territory, or in any way other than that. In addition to that, violate your self-ownership. And that's the ultimate private property, is that you own your body, you own yourself, and therefore you can homestead land, you can own property that you earned with your labor or that you've created with your own work. That is absolutely essential. So in that sense, I'm 100% with you on point one. I would just be pointing out, hey, government exists in violation of property rights inherently. Number two was that it needs a broadly based distribution of power, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. So in that sense, you said democracy. And I agree with the premise. Yes, for a nation to succeed, for a group of people to have a high standard of living, you need to have a decentralized way for people to be engaged in the allocation of resources, the creation of communal services, all of these things. Absolutely. And everybody needs to have a voice and be able to participate on equal footing in that. And that's not what democracy is. Democracy is, at least in theory, the majority coming up with an excuse to force its will on the minority. Majority rules. That's what a democracy is. And you can say, well, it's ruled by the people. Well, then what we're talking about is a government system of democracy, whether it's a representative republic or a direct democracy or anything like that, inherently takes away rights from certain groups, from whoever's in the minority in that decision-making process. And the reality of democracy, as we see in history, is that it creates the excuse for a kind of oligopoly that is the actual ruling class still in that society, because it ends up inevitably being whoever can sway for the moment of an election, the will of the majority, can now claim an excuse to stay in power until the next election that they can manipulate. And the alternative to this, aside from voluntary competitive governments at the community level, is the market, is that you have absolute fluidity. If someone running a company or a business doesn't like what or you don't like what they're doing, boom, immediately you, the community, you can withdraw support and put them out of business. With corporatism and the democracy that we have in America today, you have all the ills associated with the violation of the premise of your second point of that broad-based distribution of power is essential to the success of a nation. And so was it your third one? Sorry, what was the third?
Strong central government. You're doing amazing.
Okay, so
are you taking notes over there? Or are you doing this all off?
No,
off
I should be. No, I normally take notes on my phone. Okay, but then the idea of a strong
You're
central
doing
government,
amazing, man.
So no, man, this is what happens naturally in my brain all the time when I'm not talking to someone. You just get to bring out like my favorite stuff to talk about. So it's totally easy. I'm that nerd, and I'm okay with that.
Me too.
Okay, so strong central government. Now, okay, so and then the fourth one was rule of law, and I kind of want to take those together because strong central government doesn't address the issue of at what scale or on what terms. And you said before you got into the 4 points, you said that there was a need for government where people failed to cooperate, or that you would lose to a society that cooperates better. Well, what we're saying is let's cooperate instead of let's force our will on each other. If you want to have a defense of a forceful nature, that it's going to be better, more effective, more efficient, and have less consequences that we see of government militaries that the founders of this country were against, by the way. They called them standing armies and understood that they served monarchs, not free people. And they advocated a decentralized militia-based defense. My platform gets us one big step closer to that. But the idea that having a forced central authority is like the same thing as having a planned economy. Any kind of central planning, whether it's for food distribution or public safety services or defense, all of those have the negative consequences that you have with any monopoly. And so to the fourth point, rule of law, I think the most essential rule of law is what we would call the natural law, based on you own yourself. You know, don't hit, don't steal, don't kill. And you can't make exceptions for government. Don't steal unless you're an IRS agent. Don't hit unless you're a cop. Don't kill unless you're a soldier and a politician ordered you to go kill people on the other side of the planet. That's insane. One of the things you said is that the voluntary society was a noble goal. And I couldn't agree with you more, but I do think it is an unrealistic ideal in the sense that there will always be a certain amount of conflict that has the possibility of leading to one person's rights being violated. We could get to a completely stateless or, community-based voluntary government only kind of society. The moment a guy gets drunk at a bar and punches somebody else in the face, well, it's not voluntary for the guy getting punched. But Adam, there's a really important point that you might be missing here in terms of what's realistic and where we're going. And I can't cite this enough, and I'm surprised more people have not brought his work into politics, especially the kinds of intense conversations like this, where we're looking at these bigger academic understandings and trying to bring them down to immediate policy. Professor Steven Pinker at Harvard wrote Better Angels of Our Nature, did a great TED Talk called The Surprising Decline of Violence. And I'll argue with some of his interpretations, and lots of people do, and he admits that that's not the point of his work. But what he has proven irrefutably, academically, is that over time, over the course of human history, violence is not just on the decline, but it follows a kind of radioactive decay curve. And of course, it's a jagged line. You see the spikes from, World War I and World War II, but the clear course of human progress is towards a more cooperative society. And I see this really as essential to the nature of life itself and cooperation and the development of intelligence and technology, and that multicellular organisms beat out single cellular organisms. Communities of the apes, whatever, however you want to say, whatever our term you want to use, however far back in our biological predecessors, the ones that were not just smartest, but also the best at cooperating, formed the strongest groups. Those that were able to cooperate were able to get specialization of labor, which got us technology, which has got us to this point today, where we see this acceleration of technology, undeniably, where you look at the change over the last 20 years and go, yeah, that's the same as the last 200 and the 2000 before that, and the 20,000 before that, and you go, holy crap, where is this going? And what I see is that we are learning all the ways that coercion or violence holds humanity back from our potential. And we're in the process of looking at government that way. But Adam, before I hand it back to you, because I think, I covered those 4 points, but to get back to the central premise of this debate, I would want to ask, what is America? What does it mean to collapse? Obviously, you're capable intellectually of separating the idea of the government and the nation, which a lot of people aren't able to do. But that, you could have 50 nations or 562 with all the sovereign native tribes and have strong central governments in them. Not only have you not addressed the issue of how centralized should government be in terms of scale, right? You said strong central government, you made the case for that, but you didn't say for a global government. So if not global, how local should it be? Should we be bound by wars and circumstance of history? And maybe if you want to take that first, then we can go to the concept of what you think of as the collapse later.
Well, I'll answer the what is collapse. I agree with you on the Steven Pinker stuff. I think maybe there's some level of coercion baked in there, though, even though we are increasing in prosperity. The four things you didn't, the fourth one was creative destruction, which it's not really important. You didn't mention it, but
I'm sorry.
Strong central government.
I'm sorry. So aside from that, did I pass the Steelman test?
No, you did. With flying colors. Yeah.
As part of market development.
Yeah, with flying colors, man. With flying colors. The strong central government is to enforce the law. You answered them both. The collapse question is interesting because, there are people online right now talking about the United States collapsing all the time. Like everybody thinks we're on the verge of collapse. And there are a couple of things that worry me that I think our institutions could be breaking down and are not as anti-fragile as people would like them to be. But what a collapse looks like, I think, is interesting for our discussion, because for me, a collapse would be the United States falling into some kind of oligarchy. The USSR collapsed into what is now Russia. But I think you and I would agree.
Well, you don't think we have an oligarchy today?
I think Russia is far more an oligarchy than the United States. I think at least we have, our citizens are electing the president. Well,
you've seen the Princeton study, right? They proved academically that public opinion is negligible in terms of actually impacting policy in Washington.
Yes, I have seen that. Yeah, where like the mainstream public's sway on policy is, I think, around 5%, and like the wealthy sway on policy is up to 30%. It's still dismal, right?
Exactly. So it's an illusion.
But
It's an illusion.
Policy, I think we have all kinds of problems. I do think we do, and I think that we have to be vigilant. And I think what you're arguing against, like the size of government, the role of government, I think these conversations are important. But you're talking about no government at all. The idea that we could go.
That's not, I'm saying if you have hold on, that's not fair. I'm saying if you have government, it has to be voluntary. That's all.
Yeah, I don't really know how that comes into existence. Let's iron out the collapse argument just so we're on the same page. Would the United States, like right now, I'm not sure how you perceive of Russian politics, but Putin's going to die in office, right? He's been president forever. He's gone back and forth. He was president for a while. He's prime minister for a while. The way Putin got his money was he arrested the richest. I hate to do this, but I'm going to have to pause for a second. Can you guys give me 1 second?
Sure.
Hey, are there any questions? Are there any questions from the chat?
Sure. I can ask him a question.
Yeah, ask a couple questions. I got one thing I got to take care of.
Okay. Yeah, you're good. All right. So we got a question from Karana Ashley. It says, how would Libertarian Adam organize his tribe or community? Not have the tribe vote on things in a democratic way? How would the tribe work? So they're basically asking, what would your ideal community level government actually look like in practice?
Right. Well, I think once you get government down, so in the United States, the process is actually relatively easy because we already have the mechanisms to get rid of just the top layer of the federal government, which, by the way, is only 3 million employees out of 22 million who work for government when you include the state and local levels. So we're talking about getting rid of, close to, just a little bit more than 1 in 10 government employees. You get it down to the state level. Then you get it down to the county level. And I think at that point, we will have progressed so far, both in terms of prosperity and technology and communication, that we're going to be able to render government obsolete in most of the ways that we think of it, providing essential services, that we are going to have only what is really geographically based as what we think of as government already at that point. And it's going to become very fluid to the point, to Adam's point of creative destruction that I forgot to address. I think in terms of what we see as that so undeniably in economic terms, we should be seeing the same principles applied to government terms of wanting competition, of wanting creative destruction, where if a system of government no longer serves us, we have a right to, now I'm forgetting the words from the Declaration, to alter or abolish it. Yes. What kind of political candidate am I if I can't quote the founding documents like a pompous ass every now and then? So to get to, I have to give that as a setup to answer the questions, because I already live off grid. I already live down 3 miles of dirt road. All the roads are private. They're organized by the community. And as it is, we still pay property taxes to the county. And so one of the things I'm working on here is a long-term project, is either incorporating a new city over there or having the county split off from the rest of the county to be independent of what is currently an imposition. Yes, that's lightning or thunder over here. You're hearing. My mic's picking that up. But,
I'm back, by the way.
A beautiful thunderstorm out here in Chino Valley right now. So anyway, I'll wrap it up real quick then. Is that what I see as happening locally is like what I have in my off-grid community, where we have neighbors who help each other out, who come together for the roads and collaborate on just things that are essential to that geography. Helping each other out with our animals when we're traveling or when someone gets sick and goes to the hospital. But a lot of the functions that we have, serving that community through government, through larger healthcare systems, through economic systems, through monetary systems that are outside of that, we just plug in individually. For myself, I'm a big fan of cryptocurrency. I'm going to use Bitcoin as much as I can and not use the dollar, but neither of those things are things that have to be geographically based in the community. And the more things are decentralized and the internet is able to realize its potential, the less we'll see needed done on a geographic basis.
Talk about coercion. Like, I had to stop because my cat is outside my door, like going bonkers. I thought he cut his paw off or something. It's so crazy. I'm like, coercion hits us, man. It hits us when we least expect it. So
see, this is one of the problems. This is like one of the great pieces of being a libertarian is it's kind of like having the code to the Matrix.
I can't figure out what's wrong with this.
You see the coercion behind everything.
Oh, I know. Yeah, exactly. That's
I go to the airport, and it's like, the reason the airport sucks is because governments have a monopoly on airports, or at least, a quasi-monopoly. But like, it's just, an airport security. Oh, it's because there's a government monopoly with the TSA. And yeah, ignorance might be bliss in some situation.
I want you to talk to my mother about this coercion argument of yours. She's the one I need you to talk to. So are we on the same page where government, where if we're in an you're saying we've already collapsed and we're already in an oligarch situation. I'm under the impression that Donald Trump was.
No, hold on. No. Hold on. No. You're making I hate to keep doing this, but
go ahead.
It's a important distinction. I wouldn't say that we've already collapsed and become an oligarchy. I see this as part of human progress. Again, the American Revolution to say we don't want to be a part of the empire anymore. Sorry, King, get out of here. And we're gonna have a republic now. And it was really the people who were the elites in the colonies who said, yeah, we're gonna lead this revolution. But it was part of the decentralization of power that goes concurrent with that decline in violence. So if anything, power has still become more decentralized in the United States than it used to be, where where you said public opinion is 5%. Well, that's still better than white landowning males are the only ones who are allowed to vote and black people can still be slaves. We've come a long way, and if you think about power, not just in the political sense, just going from being a slave, even not to not voting, but going from subject to that system of abject brutality and destruction of value to at least being free to participate in the economy, that's a huge power shift right there. And if anything, the oligopoly that we have in the United States is still relatively decentralized in a lot of ways compared to probably what it was at the founding.
So if we achieved, if we had a dictator in charge and our elections were just a sham, like there was no point in voting whatsoever, would you consider that collapse, the end of the American era?
Well, see, there's a bit of a spectrum on that, because that's kind of what it is now. When you think about the way the two-party system works, candidates are more selected than elected. But
you got to understand the position you're putting.
Here.
You have to understand the position you're putting me in, though. Yeah, I'm saying that you're making the argument that we've already collapsed, and then you're saying, no, I'm not making that argument. But then when I'm saying this is what collapse looks like, you're saying we're already there.
Progressed to this point. No, I'm saying we've progressed to this point. Let's keep going. We've progressed to this point. We've gotten rid of slavery. We've given women the right to vote. We've had a great civil rights movement in this country, and we've had an incredible amount of progress. And as like I said, like this curve of the decline in violence really represents humanity embracing ethics over time. It's just that we make this exception for government, and I'm saying let's stop making that exception for government.
My argument that you're calling progress, I'm calling progress towards collapse. You're saying we're three-quarters of the way there.
The 1.0. Yeah, well, the 1 I'll agree with that on, because it is a process of 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards, is that you could look at the founding of the Federal Reserve in 1913 and the creation of the current central banking system as the start of a major step backwards that has given us modern, centralized, bureaucratic, coercive governments that serve corporatist interests that are really focused around the banking system, where governments run up huge debt and deficits, and they manipulate the economy through the financial system. And that has created a welfare warfare state, that has created the military industrial complex, that has created the militarization of police, the drug war, so many other ills that you could say are steps backwards, but they're still within that, and the overall course of human progress is forwards. We dance forwards, 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards maybe, but overall we're dancing forwards.
Well, all the things you list, though, are progress towards that first president taking the illegal third term option. Are we in agreement that that's
already
collapse? Happened. When does it happen?
FDR?
Well, no, FDR didn't take an illegal third term. They changed the law after FDR. I believe he died in office his third term. Then they made a term limit of 2 terms. Nobody's taken an illegal third term yet.
Right.
But I think we could agree that the first president that takes a third term, an illegal third term.
Okay. So you're looking at one specific aspect and calling that a national collapse, and that if the political system produced a tyrannical presidential candidate or someone who took an illegal third term, that would be the collapse. And in that sense, I still see a course of progress towards where we are today, where the old parties, in order to maintain the duopoly, have to jump through a lot more hoops. They have to feed us a lot more bullshit to get away with it. But no, that's not, I wouldn't think of that as collapse. I would think of, I think if there were a single metric that I would use, and this is, I think, where you get to in your case, you have a burden of demonstrating what is your metric of the success of the nation. And I might have been presuming to put it in your, to put the words in your mouth, and that I said, that the success would be measured by standard of life or quality of life, standard of living, quality of life, goods and services, health standards, those basic metrics. But it sounds like to you, the success is not having a government elected against its own rules that it forced on people in the first place.
Well, I would say that there's 2 states of government that we see in the natural world. And I don't know that there's a tangible example of the type of government that you're talking about. What we see in the environment is we see democracies and we see autocracies. We are a functioning democracy that I would argue is thriving. I would say that Russia is a autocracy. And what happens with autocracies
hold on a second. Are you making the argument that because it's never been done, it must be wrong? That because we don't see it today, we can't see it in the future? Because that would be a terrible logical fallacy, Gary.
I'm making the argument that we don't know it's
by
possible.
The example of slavery.
Well, how does slavery?
Hold on. We do know.
How does slavery? How does slavery prove it wrong? Well, hold on. Let me make my argument perfectly clear here. We're talking about the principles of designing a society. You're saying there is a way to design a society that's like this. We've never seen that design. And I'm looking at it like you could say that there's a way to design an airplane that's like this. We've never done it before. And I'm saying, well, if we do that, potentially that won't fly. We've never seen one of those fly before. Like if we could see one of these things, design flying, then perhaps we're having a conversation. So, but we've seen two types of flying airplanes in the world. Two types of flying airplanes, the autocracy, the democracy. They both seem stable. One is a hellhole to live in. The other one, the taxes suck. I agree with you, man. We're in total agreement there. I hate paying taxes too.
Okay. I got to make 2 points, and I'll totally address everything you just said. I think first, the slavery thing, to answer your question. When people said, hey, we should abolish slavery, there were people who objected on the grounds of, well, we've never had a society without slavery. Who's going to pick the cotton without slaves? And you never could have imagined that we would have internal combustion engines and automatic harvesters just going through the fields, practically pooping out T-shirts. But people said it doesn't matter. It's wrong. It has to end. It is an ethical violation. the same way that every coercive government in the world is today. Now, to your point that it's never been done before, that's really not accurate either. And I'm not trying to say some historical comparison to say, all right, so in a sense, it's been done before in that we have gotten less coercive, less violent over time. So when you say there are only two categories of societies, and I'm talking about designing something radically different, that's a really inaccurate analogy, because a better analogy would be to say, hey, look, we designed a sedan, and then we designed a station wagon, and everybody's going like, well, there's only two types of cars, there's sedans and station wagons, and I'm coming around going, hey, how about an SUV? We can have an SUV. And people, well, that might never work. We've never, and it's really, no, we're just building it to the next level of functionality, the next scale of peace, the next scale of harmony, the next scale of all of those things that I agree on the core points of your four reasons. Yeah, we need creative destruction. Absolutely. We need rule of law. We need distributed, and we need distributed power, and we need property rights. And I guess if you may let me keep going here on one point, the strong central government with the rule of law, again, it's not that you need a strong central government, but that you need something that's going to provide those services. And those services will always, the public safety, dispute resolution, those services will always be provided better when people come together in market-based terms, in cooperative means rather than coercive ones. Sort of like win-win versus win-lose. If it's cooperative, it's win-win. If it's coercive, it's win-lose. And if you have enough the more win-lose relationships you have in a society, the more tyrannical, the more coercive, the more violent it is, the worse it is for standard of living.
Well, the problem I have with the market-based solution is there are markets that people are shut out of. I myself am currently shut out of the yacht market. I would really love to get into the yacht market, but I'm not rich enough to buy a yacht. So the problem with making the court system, which
you're also shut out of the market for other planets.
Well,
you're also shut out of the market for artificial intelligence brain implants.
I'm bummed.
You're also shut out of the market for interstellar travel. You're also shut out of the AI robot market. I mean,
but you're talking about shutting people.
But the way we get those things sooner for everybody.
You're talking about shutting people out of the market for basic, like police services, for basic court services. I mean, there's an argument to be made. People are already shut out of those markets.
That's what government. No, I'm talking about the opposite. That's what government does. Look at the world we live in today. If you're poor, you can't afford to hire a lawyer. You can't afford to go to court. These things are intentionally designed to keep access for poor people, for the middle class.
Stop right here. Adam, stop for 1 second, okay?
Okay.
I completely agree with you, but you are making my argument. You are making my argument that society is drifting towards that autocracy, which I am saying is collapse. I'm saying that we are moving towards collapse and that we have to be vigilant against working towards collapse.
It's still gotten better over time.
But
even those things that I said just now, are getting better over time.
So you're saying that No, I agree. Are you saying that your system is going to provide more justice services to people at a lower price? That's basically what you're saying? Or how do you know that it's not going to shut people out of the market?
It's going to be, absolutely. And having it more decentralized, having it more community-based, taking out the corruption of the central planning and the central authority that serves special interests inherently makes it more accessible for people.
I want to touch on one question, and then we can move on to questions. We've been going almost an hour now, but on the collapse thing. So are we?
Wow, time flies. Adam, I gotta say, I'm sorry I've been talking too much, but I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am. This is so juicy, and you're really setting me up here, like to make me look like a jerk in the debate who talks too much, dangling all this red meat in front of me.
I'm not trying to, man. I enjoy the conversation. But on the collapse thing, like, are we in agreement that we don't want to be Russia, that we don't want to be an autocracy?
Of course.
Okay, so we're in agreement there.
We
We
want
don't want collapse.
decentralized.
Yes, yes. So my argument basically is that when you pull out the strong central government, and I think the argument is made much better by Darren Acemoglu and James A. Robinson in the book Why Nations Fail, but when you don't have that strong central government that can enforce rule of law, you get people taking advantage of other people. It becomes autocracy. And I agree with you that we're drifting in that direction. What you said about the legal system is perfectly valid. Like, it is definitely stilted in favor of people with money who can do things to other people unambiguously that are completely unfair. And that is a problem that we need to work on fixing. But I don't think dissolving the federal government, dissolving people's hand on the steering wheel of society is the way to do that. I think that's more steering towards the autocracy route. So I'll go ahead and let you.
Well, creating
you
that central authority is putting. Yeah. No, what you've done is created a steering wheel that shouldn't exist and handed it to the sickest, most evil people in society who are willing to do what it takes to win high political office. And in doing so, in concentrating that power rather than decentralizing it, you're entrenching all of the things that lead to these problems that you point out today. When you say that the rule of law needs to be imposed by a central authority, well, if that central authority is coercive, then it's not enforcing the rule of law. It's enforcing a monopoly on violence and saying we're the only ones who get to do this in this culture, in this or in our territory. So inherently, what you get with that is the corruption. What really determines rule of law is the paradigm of what people will put up with. The limits of tyranny are set by the tolerance of the oppressed. If we tolerate a central government saying we're going to take so much out of your paycheck and we're going to spend the average American household now spends $7,000 a year on the military industrial complex. That's insane. That's not a representation of the will of the people. It's the opposite. It's the corruption of the will of the people through the political process. As you know, before we started this, that political opinions of the public have a negligible impact on policy. So who's determining that policy? Special interests, the super class, corporations. Those are the real string pullers. Those are the ones who are served by the system. That's not serving natural law. That's not serving the people. That's not serving justice.
Let's go to questions, Drew. Do we have questions from the chat?
Yeah, we have a lot of questions.
I bet.
All right, so yeah, we do. A lot of them are for Libertarian Adam here.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So this is from Musta Pilari.
Wait, if I'm Libertarian, hold on. If I'm Drew, sorry, Drew, you've been doing such an amazing job. Yeah. I gotta ask, if I'm Libertarian Adam, what's the other Adam?
Friended.
Friended?
I'm the guy with the easy last name to pronounce.
Not status Adam? No.
What I mean,
right.
It's a tough.
It's just a substitute for last name.
It's a tough argument to defend the state, and I don't like doing it, man. The taxes are too high, man. The rent is too damn high. There's too much damn corruption. Like, I agree with everything that you're saying.
It's fundamentally unethical. At its core, it's fundamentally unethical, and doing unethical things is bad for human happiness.
But you yourself say that they will do anything to maintain political power. I agree with you. The system that we have requires them to do things that are less, like in North Korea, what you have to do to stay in power is you have to kill everyone that's trying to get the seat. Like, what happens when America is in that position?
I think we withdraw the consent of the governed. And I throw up in my mouth every time I have to introduce myself as a presidential candidate, because you have to be some kind of psychopath to want to put on the ring of power as opposed to throw it directly into the fire. And it really is more accurate to say that with this campaign, we are turning the federal election into a referendum on whether or not the federal government should be allowed to exist at all. And I'm confident that in the age of the internet in 2020, in the world that we live in today, in reality, that when the American people unequivocally say, no, we're not going to do this anymore, they won't be able to keep that racket going.
Well, as a presidential candidate, I feel obligated to ask, will you take a pledge not to take an illegal third term? I want it in
since
writing.
you asked the question that way, I get no. It's even better than that. My platform is to resign on day one, because on day one we declare the federal government bankrupt, and that's what starts the process. So the authority that I would have is not the authority of the presidency, but the custodian of the federal government, which would be my title that I take on after that. And the only authority that I would have there really is as the custodian of the institution to take it through a bankruptcy process. So
what do you think?
Immediately, federal laws are unenforceable.
What do you think would happen, though, if, let's say, just hypothetically, 2020 rolls around, you destroy Trump in the election, you go into office and you resign? You don't think Trump is like, I'm already living here in this house, I already have all the staff, why not just stick around?
Well, no, because I am going in. I am going in to sign the one executive order. I mean, there will be a planned legal way of carrying this out. I think this can be the most peaceful, largest scale transition of government power in human history. And what we're talking about doing is avoiding the pain of a collapse, because the current system is not sustainable. I'm sure you're familiar with the history of the Roman Empire and the arc of its history. And you can trace the history of the American Empire through a very similar pattern and see where we are now. But if we face up to the problem and apply a solution as big as the problem, then we can avoid that collapse. We can avoid that painful turnover. And what you're suggesting is that if the American people overwhelmingly say we're going to do this, that in the time that we live in today, again, part of it is that in order for government to exist, it needs an enforcement class. It needs cops and soldiers willing to do violence against peaceful people because politicians told them to. And when they see, oh, the American people have decided that these orders aren't valid anymore, they're not going to follow those orders.
What happens? So there are like 465 congressmen, I believe. There's 100 senators. All these people are in positions of power. What happens to them? Because their status immediately takes a hit.
Yeah, tough shit, huh? I think they deserve that.
Well, don't you think they'll fight
in the right direction?
Don't you think they'll fight for their power, though?
I don't think they'll have a choice. Actually, what we're probably going to end up doing with Congress is incorporating it into the bankruptcy process, where at least congressional representatives get to be advocates and for resources that are going to be distributed, apportioned among the states, and same thing with the senators. So they would have a role in the bankruptcy process. And in the sense that their power is based on the consent of the American people, the will as expressed through elections, at least they will know that if they have any power, it's tied to, well, the American people said, we're not going to have a president anymore. We're going to dissolve this thing.
So let's go ahead to the chat.
I think Adam. Yeah, I was about to say let's hand it over to Andrew. Sorry,
right.
Drew. Andrew's my brother's name.
No, you're good, man. It's not a big deal. All right. So we got a lot of questions for Libertarian Adam here. Okay, so the first question is from Musta Pilari. Who gets the nukes in this situation?
That's
Can I have
a
them?
really good question, and it goes to the right. Like it goes to privatize all the nukes. No, that's not what we're talking about. Not in a direct literal sense of nuclear weapons, actually. So this gets to the principles of the bigger bankruptcy process that I would be applying, which to go to the Department of Defense, what weaponry is inappropriate defensive weaponry that's held by the Department of Defense. And so that would be nuclear submarines, aircraft carriers, long-range drones, a host of other technologies that really have no legitimate defensive purpose, including nuclear warheads. So the remainder of that weaponry, that which could be plausibly appropriately used for defensive purposes, would be apportioned among the states, including the naval and Coast Guard resources that would be appropriate for the states with the water lines, with coastlines and littoral regions. But the remainder of what's offensive would be de-weaponized and liquidated. So with the nuclear weapons, they get returned to non-weaponized or non-weaponizable basic components, and then basically turn to market purposes or whatever productive purposes people who are able to pool the resources to buy those are able to do. And I imagine a lot of that's going to be through state governments as well. But one of the ways that we're basically erasing the debt record, aside from, as I said, disowning the illegitimate debt, because frankly, it's illegitimate debt when it's a kind of intergenerational child abuse. You're forcing your children to pay for stuff they never had a say in. There's no way that's a legitimate debt. But to go to the next level with how we're actually going to fund and carry out the distribution of these resources fairly to the American people is that we're going to do a cryptocurrency airdrop of Americoins. We might call it something else. I haven't worked out all the details on this, but that every American is going to get an allocation of a cryptocurrency that is going to be the only one that we accept for liquidating the federal government's assets. So we're launching a cryptocurrency with a tangible backing from the very beginning and tied to a very real process where every American has a fair stake.
How do we avoid invasion if we're in the same position as North Korea all of a sudden without nuclear weapons?
Right. Well, one of the great myths of how we're taught about war in school is basically what baked into the language. We're taught that wars are fought between countries, right? It was America versus Germany versus Japan versus Russia versus China. And when you think about it and you understand what a government is, it's really nonsense. Countries don't go to war. Governments use violence to expand their protection rackets. And that's really a much more accurate understanding of what we're talking about here. And I think using accurate language is so important. The Dalai Lama was once asked, if you were president, what's the first thing you would do? And he said he would start calling things by their true name. And I think that's really important in understanding how war is a racket. Poor men die to line rich men's pockets every time. And the founders of this country knew that having a military makes you less safe. And I don't just mean in the sense that, you know, like I experienced when I was in Fallujah in 2004, where with terrorism, we're literally making enemies faster than we can kill them, because that's how it was designed. I'm not talking about false flags, but even at a deeper level, if you tell your government that you're willing to pay tribute at gunpoint and you'll do nothing to resist, you say, yes, please take half my income, subject me to your monopoly services as long as you keep me safe. Well, that's exactly what makes you a juicy target for another government that would come in and govern you like you're being governed now. And the threat of China is raised as a specter. But considering that the average American is working for government half the year when you add up all the costs of government, we should be so grateful as to have another government come in and have to start from scratch developing a tax system. And really, what the founders were advocating was not a vulnerability, but a strength, because they knew that the ultimate defense of a free people, the only legitimate and efficient one, is a well-armed population that refuses to be governed by anyone. And as Gandhi proved, the well-armed part is optional.
Drew?
Yeah. Tio asks, are you an and does religion have a place in our future?
We didn't.
Sorry. Did you hear that?
Yeah. Was that the lightning?
Yeah, that's thunder here in Chino Valley, Arizona. You're going to have to repeat the question.
Okay, so Tio asks, are you an anarcho-capitalist, and does religion have a place in our future?
Wow, that's two big questions. And I think I addressed the first one about anarcho-capitalists when I talked about the term anarchy earlier, but specifically to the term anarcho-capitalist, I really, there was a term coined by Murray Rothbard, who really is the intellectual godfather of libertarianism. And I think what he was describing philosophically, and his book that woke me up was called Ethics of Liberty, is this idea of voluntarism at the core of it. And anarchy and capitalism are sort of outcomes or results that you might get from a voluntary society. So if anarchy means no government or statelessness, well, you could have voluntary government in some places and you could have anarchy in other places. As long as it's voluntary, we don't have a problem with that if we're saying we want an ethical society. Same thing with capitalism. You know, if people create, like capitalism is an economic system based on ownership of the means of production. If it's an ethical society that respects the fact that you own yourself, then you could say, well, in an umbrella sense, it's all capitalism. But if people within that form a socialist commune, I'm not going to say, no, you can't call that socialism because you're doing it ethically. Therefore, it must be capital. No, you're creating an economic system. That's socialism. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. And for those reasons, I think that the term voluntarist is more accurate to describing what we mean as libertarians when we say freedom is what you have when no one is forcing their will on you. This is what you have as individual rights. These are basic standards of ethics. That's what comes first to at least most of us who identify as libertarians. And within the Libertarian Party, the one box you have to check when you sign up to take the pledge to join is, I reject the use of force or violence to achieve political or social goals. It's the one thing that we say absolutely is a standard of ethics when you join the party. So religion, you know, I don't talk about religion a whole lot, mainly out of a sense of my own humility. I was raised in a very secular household that celebrated both Hanukkah and Christmas in cultural ways, but didn't really have any greater spiritual awareness. And I'm grateful for my parents' upbringing in every way possible, but it is worth pointing out that there was a certain deficiency in this regard. And I've gone through various stages of atheism and agnosticism and pantheism and observing the question of spirituality or the supernatural for myself. And where I've come to land now that I feel the most comfortable is what I would describe as pantheism / Buddhism. So I would not really be in any kind of position to weigh in on religion, because a lot of people define that in different ways, and some people would say Buddhism's not even a religion, or doesn't meet some standard of definition. But if religion is a tool to live better, if religion is a way of understanding the universe better, if it's a way of living in harmony with your fellow human beings better, of elevating your own standard of ethics and the ethics of society, then I think overthrowing the cult of statism and embracing whatever religion gets you towards living better and more ethically and respecting your fellow human beings, as opposed to thinking of them as subjects to have a government force on them, then yeah, I think that's absolutely essential to human progress and the inevitability of a voluntary society.
Aren't you working a bit backwards?
These are
Adam?
terrible run-on sentences. Yeah. I can't believe no one's jumped on me for that yet.
Aren't you working a bit backwards here, Adam? Because it seems to me that your biggest problem is the involuntary coercion of people. So you seem to be structuring your entire idea of how society should function around that one thing, to try to get rid of that one thing without thinking in terms of a balance, because I don't necessarily know that you'll ever be able to completely eliminate that.
Well, there's no violence, or there's no balance between violence and nonviolence. It's like saying we need to have a balance between good and bad. I mean, that's kind of inherent to existence, but that, hey, we can't, like, we need to have a balance of food that's poisoned and food that's not poisoned. Like, I'm not actually advocating for any particular system and saying that this is how we have to achieve this particular social function. All I'm saying is that every social function that we apply violence to gets worse, at least takes us back from our potential of how good it could be if we had a nonviolent system. So let's get rid of the coercive part. So in a sense, it's not a political system of imposing as much as a principle of saying, hey, whatever system we have, let's make it ethical.
Right. But and I think you have a valid argument in bringing violence into it, but there's other levels of coercion that we use before we jump straight to the violence. Like, normally we structure even crime in terms of like tickets, there's ways of coercing people that aren't just straight violence. I mean, I worry about violence, and in autocracies, violence reigns supreme.
Yeah, Okay, so let me then. I think I have to define the term very precisely as I use it, because some people would say that, you know, if you're in a relationship and you're threatening to leave, that you're coercing someone by threatening, and I would say that's a metaphorical use of the term coercion, because coercion is dictionary defined as a threat of violence, and that is the application of force against another individual. And so whether it's a parking ticket or execution, when it's done by governments as we know it today, yes, there's a scale of the negative consequences, of course, but it's still fundamentally coercive, because what happens if you get issued a ticket and you don't pay it? Now, I know this is eventually, maybe it goes away in some jurisdictions, or it just goes on your credit report or something like that. Maybe there isn't a threat of coercion behind it. But at the level of ticket that turns into a bench warrant, right, which is most tickets and most traffic tickets in the United States, most moving violations, it can be resolved with that, by mail. But if you don't, they turn into a bench warrant, which is a demand by government that you be at a certain place and time in front of a judge. And if you don't, then a warrant is issued for your arrest, and they actually have to go out and get you. And if you say, well, no, I don't want to be gotten, I want to stay in my home, then they use violence against you and they take you. And if you resist, eventually they kill you. So there are plenty of ways of achieving these social pressures and means of collaboration without the threat of violence, where you can say, no, I'm going to withdraw my support. I'm going to shut you out of the system. I'm not going to let you be a part of maybe it's our community or our dispute resolution system if you're not paying your dues, but we don't get to come in and violate your rights. We don't get to threaten you ultimately with death or with kidnapping if you're not buying into our system.
You're saying coercion is only violence, though. What happens if I lie to you and tell you? What happens if I lie to you and tell you that there's this incredible business opportunity that you'd be a fool to pass up, and you take me up on that offer? No, I'm not threatening you with any kind of violence. I'm committing fraud, but I'm not threatening you with violence.
Yes,
that's not coercion.
That's why. No, technically it's not coercion, but it's still a violation of someone's self-ownership, and this is why, as libertarians, we say a society free of force, fraud, and coercion. I don't know if I said that earlier today, but I say it a lot. But those are the ways that you violate someone's individual right.
The whole idea behind a strong central government is you have an entity that's charged with enforcing these ideas. Like you can't just say we're free of fraud without the cop on the beat. Like a game without referees turns into a mess, turns into chaos.
Okay, so all right, so I'm not advocating for a game without referees. I'm saying that the referee can't walk up to a bunch of kids playing soccer in the park, point a gun at everyone and say, I'm the referee now. The kids playing soccer in a park get to choose who their referee is going to be. Or if they happen to be better off without a referee, and they want to play a spontaneous game where the rules are determined or everybody's happy cooperatively and anybody can walk away from the game at any time, then that's fine too. So in terms of providing the services that you're talking about, we shouldn't, if you want to prevent people from stealing from you, why would you say, well, let's have a central authority that can steal from us to prevent people from stealing from us? To provide those services of public safety and dispute resolution will be always better when they're formed either through market or voluntary community-based means, rather than when you give up the goal with your premise.
I got to ask while I have you, because I'm curious as hell. Like, what is your position on immigration? Since immigration are technically people who are volunteering to be governed.
Yeah. Well, in terms of freedom of movement, the only limitations on freedom of movement that are legitimate and appropriate are private property borders. Government borders are fundamentally illegitimate because there's no legitimate property rights claim, and the government is actually violating individual rights, not just by interfering with freedom of movement of individuals, but of private property. For example, with me in Arizona, I live on 10 acres. I should have the right, respected, to invite anyone from anywhere on the planet to come and visit me on my 10 acres, unless I have some other agreement with my neighbors that I'm not going to bring certain people around. for the government to put up a line and say, no, you can't.
Are you saying you're for open borders? The only reason I'm asking is because
No.
there are 10 million Americans.
I'm for private property borders.
Well, there are 10 million Americans.
Private property borders.
There are 10 million Americans that by your standard are legitimate Americans because they're here voluntarily. They technically have this consent of the governed more than anyone else.
Considering that this country was founded in civil disobedience and rebellion against an unjust central authority, I would even go so far as to say that compared to most, at least Republican and Democrat enthusiastic voters and elected officials, that in fact, I'll say this, that every person who comes into this country illegally is more American than any elected Democrat or Republican. Because what they're doing is engaging in the kind of rebellion that this country was founded on, whereas the people who are holding elected office for the duopoly are the redcoats of today's age.
That's strong, very strong. Any more questions, Drew?
Yeah, sure. So this isn't a direct question, but I think it's getting at something that I think a lot of people are talking about in the comments. So this is from Stanton High. It says, where does a non-central authority work witout deep conflict? So I think the idea is that I think people are concerned that when you decentralize the federal government, you would fractionate into a lot of small communities like tribes that would then engage in some sort of warlike behavior against each other. So how do you avoid something like that if you're like dissolving the central government that keeps everybody from like engaging like full out civil wars?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the most important thing is making government more accountable to the people. I think it was Goebbels in Nazi Germany who said, naturally the people don't want war, but it is easy for the leaders to bring them to their bidding. Well, that corruption of the will of the people is way more likely to happen when you have a strong central government. When you have decentralized governments, you're going to have more cooperation. You're going to have more respect for the will of the people. The politicians who are able today to make the costs of war, delocalize, I should say, they're able to take the costs of war away from their voter base, or at least make it look like that. Then it's easy for them to get away with serving the military-industrial complex at the expense of the rest of us. When you have government at the local level, that's not going to be the same issue. You're going to have a much greater accountability. It's going to be much easier to hold politicians, if you still want politicians, that is, to the will of the people. And when you talk about the bigger challenge of harmony and decentralization versus centralization, again, this kind of gets to the creative destruction and adaptation fluidity of society. When you have central planned anything, you have rigidity, you have consequences, you have failures to adapt. When you have something that's decent and you have limits in cooperation inherently, because people at the decentralized levels aren't able to make decentralized decisions or change the system for themselves, they're forced into one centralized system. And the greatest example that we have of this functioning so well today is through blockchain technology, again, with Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, but also everything that we see happening on the internet that decentralizes authority. It says anybody who can communicate directly, can make decisions, can figure things out better for themselves, better than someone in a far off central authority. And really, it's only when you have that you have the opportunity for the kind of corrupt war that we know in the modern era.
Okay, so just to clarify on this, so say you dissolve the federal government, and then you have like everybody like forms their little communities, and then one community says, all right, we're going to be a war community, and we're just going to try to go around and take people's crap. Like I'm concerned that immediately what happens when you take, like, we're all bound to one group by being in a nation. And if you fractionate people into smaller communities, I'm worried that those communities start warring with each other for supremacy is basically the concern. Like, you understand the question?
Right. Well, the reality that we have today, again, it goes to the problem of centralization, is that when we make mistakes as a country today, or rather as a country with a leech on its ass known as the federal government of the United States, those mistakes are really big and they're really hard to correct. And so I'm not saying that by decentralizing government, there will never be any problems, but we'll have a much better comprehensive competitive environment where those mistakes will be isolated and we'll see the consequences and people will be able to withdraw their support. So any of the consequences that we see of violence from government will be dealt with better in a decentralized society. And to the specter of things getting more violent, again, it's hypothetically possible that one state might do that or one Native American tribe would decide to do that. But considering they're going to be surrounded by well-armed neighbors, I don't think that's very realistic. And I think their people would be able to realize relatively quickly that it's not in their best interest. And the idea that somehow decentralization of government would buck the trend of decline in violence seems extremely unrealistic to me. That the question is sometimes asked, well, Adam, if we got rid of government entirely, which is not what I'm advocating, but if you got it all the way down to the community level, well, what's going to stop someone from becoming a warlord and taking charge and saying we're going to be? Really, that's the bigger threat, not just the way that you say it, Drew, but hypothetically, the bigger threat is, what if we got government down to the community level and some warlord said, not we're going to be a little warring community, but hey, we're going to take over, we're going to expand, and we're going to have all these people create an army with me because I'm a dictator now. The thing is, I have not just faith in humanity, but an understanding of human progress, of how we get smarter and better and more capable over time. And that in order for that to happen, for a warlord to stand up and become that tyrant, they would have to say, hey, remember when we had wars? Remember when we had the police state? Remember when we had central banking and corporatism? Wasn't that awesome? Let's do that again. And I think one of the greatest things of the age of the internet is that our memory is a lot better, at least in a functional sense. And for someone to say, let's go back to that, really not realistic.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. We're creeping up on an hour and a half here. Do you have anything that you want to plug or anything you've got coming up in the near future?
Wait. Can we motion to extend by 1 hour? Can we? No?
I don't have another hour, but I mean, if you want to, usually we do like a closing statement or something like that. We're running a little bit long, but let's go ahead and do closings. I began, so I would go first on a closing, and then you would have the final word. Does that sound good?
Sure. That's fine. Yeah, that's great.
Are you having trouble with your cat too?
No, yeah, I'm like, no, since you said, is there anything you want to plug? Where I do my interviews at home, I always have a copy of my book handy.
Nice.
To hold up as a prop at the end of interviews. And I'm like, where's my car copy? Oh, shoot, I gave away my car copy, but I got stickers because I'm sort of prepared.
Nice. I was up in Santa Cruz. I have my stickers too. Okay, so
the mystery spot, I went there as a kid. Oh my God, I love that. Yeah, my nanny, when I was growing up, I grew up in the San Mateo area. She had that bumper sticker on her car. Man, you are bringing back memories from when I was like 8 years old.
How it works, we may never know, but we can share the mystery spot. So I think I'll close with my original argument, and I think it's the strongest argument. It's the argument that people are making in the chat. It's the argument that and this is a Bertrand Russell quote. It's every community is exposed to two opposite dangers: ossification for too much discipline or reverence for tradition on one hand, and on the other hand, disillusionment or subjection to foreign conquest. Through a growth of individualism and personal experience that makes cooperation impossible. And the thing that we're worried about is not just the subjugation to foreign conquest, but even conquest from within. Because the thing that I'm worried about, and you seem to have some reverence for this, the aspects of corruption that we're facing. I think we have to be vigilant that our government serves us, we the people, and that I think is the innovation that has made America the success that it is. And I worry that this kind of radical solution to get zero taxes, which is something I'm in favor of. Who doesn't want zero taxes? Like I think we're all in agreement. Zero taxes would be awesome. But I worry in the book Why Nations Fail and in the book Dictator's Handbook, they go through many different nations and the autocracies, the democratic republics, the democracies, the functioning democracies. Yes, they have high taxes. It's always 30 to 50% in taxes. The autocracies, they pay 90% in taxes. The government just completely takes advantage of the citizens in ways that I worry to try and cut our taxes in half, we're risking doubling them. So that's my final argument. Go ahead, you have the last word.
Oh man, I thought I had more time to get my thoughts together after all that, Adam. You really you made it a quick punch there. Well, you say you're concerned with the collapse of nations or the things that lead nations to fail. I'm more concerned with the things that lead people to succeed. And having your individual property rights respected, as you pointed out, is essential to that, to having an interest in success rather than having that taken away from you. Having your self-ownership respected, at not having violence used against you or coercion or fraud to violate you of your person, your freedom, your health, or your property. I think those are all very essential things. Now, if you look at what I'm advocating as an ultimately ethical society, when we are in so many ways dependent on unethical systems today, you could say, oh yeah, man, that's kind of radical. But any change that happens over a period of decades, and of course that's what I'm talking about here, would seem radical when you compress it down to a singular conversation. But when it comes to the policy that I'm advocating of localizing government, of decentralizing power, is really just a continuation of what we've seen over the course of human history, where we become less violent over time, which means that individual rights are more respected over time. And what we're talking about in terms of getting rid of the federal government, like I said, we're only talking about 3 million out of 22 million people who work for the government in the United States, including the state and local levels. So just more, and considering how many of those personnel are going to be apportioned among the states that state governments are going to keep employed from then on, we're really talking about getting rid of about 1 in 10 government employees. I think America can handle that. I think that's actually extremely moderate. When we talk about the paradigm of statism that I want us to get away from, that if enough people get together and vote on something, that somehow ethics go out the window, it magically becomes okay to use violence against peaceful people. Yeah, I want to get away from that. But what I'm proposing is actually a very moderate step in that direction, in the sense that if you're a liberal, you live in a liberal state, you're a conservative, you live in a conservative state. Well, I mean, people in San Francisco shouldn't be making laws for people in San Antonio. You put it like that, it seems insane, right? You get a government experience that's more in line with your values. If you want that conservative government, you can have it, at least as long as you can get people in your state to agree to it before they want to split off and do their own thing. You want a more liberal government. If people want to stay in a state, and I know there's some in New England where people are going to want to stay together and have liberal governments for, as long as it takes to really render them obsolete with complete nonviolent systems, rather than getting away from the current violent systems to pave the way for that to happen faster. If they want to really hold on to that, yeah, you can have that. I'm not going to prevent you from doing that. But even at a more fundamental level, this idea of localization really is the cure for polarization. And when you're saying we're all going to be forced under one system, then if you disagree with me, I have to see you as an enemy, because one of us is going to win this political fight, and my will is going to be imposed on you, or your will is going to be imposed on me, or the more often reality is that the people who really pull the strings are going to be able to force their will on both of us, as opposed to when we see each other respectfully and say, you want to live differently? That's great. I support you. Now, as a member of the tribe, at least to a certain extent, the fringe rise of white nationalism in the United States is viscerally disturbing. But I would still say, as a libertarian, if you want an ethno state and you get together on private property with people who want that, and you don't force it on anybody else, and you don't hold anybody captive, I'm never going to live there. That's dumb as hell. Bigotry is one of the great forces holding back humanity, but it's not as bad as violence. And I'm not willing to use violence to stop you from choosing who you want to associate with. If you're a socialist gun grabber and you want to live in a nudist commune in the woods, hey, I'll take my entertainment from a distance. Thank you very much. I'm not going to live there either. But I want you to have that right. Localization is the everybody gets what they want strategy. So for me, this is based in voluntarism, and you can get my book, Freedom, for free in every digital format possible, including audiobook. Is it focused? Yes, thefreedomline.com. And I would encourage everybody to check it out. It's just 100 pages. I started writing it when I was in jail in 2014. And it's the audiobook's just 3 hours. It's the easiest way to get the philosophical foundation behind everything I've said in this wonderful debate. And if you want to be a part of the campaign, I would greatly appreciate your support. You don't have to remember how to spell my funny last name and get to kokeshforpresident.com. You can just go to thefreedomline.com. You can find my YouTube channel, all my social media, everything. And please join our email list at kokeshforpresident.com when you get to the Freedom Line, and be a part of it. This is the revolution that you've been waiting for.
Well, this has been a fascinating dialogue. So I love the debate. I love the discussion. So thank you for joining in. And Drew, do you have any parting words? Do you have anything you want to pitch?
Yeah, you can check out my YouTube channel at Drew Welty on YouTube. I posted a video like a week ago on why I don't think we should use the term stochastic terrorism anymore, if you want to check it out.
I agree.
Yeah, right, it's terrible.
Well, hey guys, I'm sorry. I did forget one last thing I got to plug. If you're at the end of this video watching this now, I got to say that as someone who's got plenty of experience in independent media, I know the work that it takes to make conversations like this happen, to fight against the tech giants, to get out there and to stand up to the mainstream media, to create alternative media that gets more important ideas out there that aren't about continuing the status quo. So if you enjoy this, please share it. And if you didn't enjoy this one, but you normally enjoy Adam and Drew throwing down, share something else from the Think Club debates. The technology means nothing without deliberate, conscientious use. So please be an active and engaged audience.
Wow, man, that's awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So we'll go ahead and leave it there. Thanks again for joining in, and we'll see you all in the next video.